Thank you, Dr. Keeley. It's really wonderful to be here, and I want to thank also our sponsors, friends, and guests for being here. A very special thank you to Stephanie Sloan-White, who's really the catalyst behind the Ideas That Matter series, and convinced me I had an idea that mattered and not just an idea of little or no consequence, which is my usual flavor. She is one of these people who can turn ideas into events that people are really interested in, and has her characteristic poise, style, and killer wit, which I think has been really why so many of us have been excited about this series. I also want to thank my husband, Rice Fuller, with whom I have spent many of our precious Saturday evenings out talking about a lot of these ideas, and I do appreciate his thoughts on so much of this. So I'm going to pull this off a little bit, even though it's very lounge singy, and I've promised Stephanie not to do my interpretive dance of sex and the internet, because nobody likes to see that. And I have to signal every time I need a slide change, so we're kind of going low tech tonight, which is ironic, I think. But I just wanted to do a quick informal survey of how many of you own a smartphone of some type, either a BlackBerry or iPhone. Yes, Sue, I know you because you're so ardent with yours. Okay, how many of you, of those hands, of which almost everyone, how many of you had that smartphone at least 4 years ago? Okay, far fewer. And it's really impossible, I think, to imagine that anyone is unaware of the extent to which our lives have rapidly become inundated with internet-based technologies, especially communication technologies. And any random photo of a crowded street now shows at least half the people on a phone. It's really rare to see anyone in a coffee shop anymore just reading a book quietly without being at least arm's reach from a laptop or a phone. Parents text rather than watch their kids swim on Saturday mornings. Nobody gets lost for long anymore. We can call for directions or just use a GPS. Couples text during their dates. And you sit at the lights of Regent and Prospect, and you can see how many people are on the phone when they're driving or texting while they're driving. I mean, we're absolutely obsessed. And it's really hard in so many ways to make consistent eye contact with any young person these days. Their eyes stray constantly to their bleeping phone that delivers a steady stream of messages that they have to check. Just a second, they have to check. And they are constantly connected. And yes, this is especially true of young people. They use new communication technologies at much higher rates than any other age group. And I will argue that these technologies are having a profound impact on all of our relationships, the ways in which we interact with each other, including the ways in which we develop intimate relationships, express our romantic interests, and conduct our sexual lives. And indeed, sexual lives of many young people are being transformed, I think, in ways we could never have anticipated. Now, parents, educators, policymakers, public health specialists, everyone is concerned. But should they be? These concerns, I think, are fueled by near daily media coverage of the more extreme outcomes of digital technology. Victims of cyberbullying, attempting suicide, a sexy self photo that goes viral, predators chatting online with your child. Alarm, panic, danger. It's just not a new theme. It was recently rap music corrupting youth, before that sex on TV, not so long before that rock and roll. And it's a form of hysteria or moral panic that is not found among young people, but is definitely found among young adults. And so today, my talk will review research addressing both the negative and positive impact of internet-based technologies on the sexuality and relationships of young people. Okay, first slide. I want to review some basics about technology. Canada is near the top of the pack in terms of internet technology uptake. And the latest national survey shows that, about 98% of young people access the internet almost daily, and usually for quite a few hours a day. The gender and economic divides that used to be characteristic of earlier studies have practically disappeared. And New Brunswick, next slide, is somewhat lower than national average, but still pretty high. And we find that young people, around 12 to 18, in terms of text use, for instance, average about, well, they were 2 years ago about 60 texts a day. They usually report 100 to 200 texts a day. And that's an average. You definitely have people who are texting so much more than that. About 84% indicate that there are no parental rules about such things. Now, young people 24 and under are what we call digital natives, meaning that technology is an extension of the way they think. They've grown up with it. They know of no other life. It fits with the way they think, and they adopt new technologies, new modes very easily. Most people older than 25 are digital tourists. We're newer to the area. It's somewhat foreign to us. We're not sure always what we're doing. We're not as fluent in the language, the customs, the culture, but we're trying. And okay, that's actually a slide of some New Brunswick data that I have just to show you relative, say, to studying and exercise, how much screen time high school students are engaging in technology use. So the next slide. This is a really fun website. I don't know if you've seen it. When Parents Text. It's just a great example of how digital tourists are trying to become familiar in many ways with a technology that is so much more easier for digital younger people. I love that one. It's important to note that we will never, not ever, return to a pre-technology era. That train has left the station. Our minds are really consumed with a medium that delivers profiles, tweets, posts, and updates, a constant stream of new things to look at. It responds faster than we can think, which is extremely rewarding. And we're able to stay in touch, attract new friends, consolidate old friendships, develop followers, and form closer bonds. So these technologies have become our typewriters, our clocks, our maps, our phones, our radios, our TVs, even our libraries. We're never, ever going to give that up. We love it. And so now let me get to what most people come for, which is about sex. Sex is a constant in my research life, so often I forget, oh, people want to hear about the sex. So some basics about sexual development. So here's an interesting fact, actually. I think a lot of people don't know this. All adults were once adolescents. And I say it a little facetiously, but people, it's a constant source of amazement to me how many adults enter this psychogenic fugue about their adolescence. It's like a state of amnesia that they cannot snap out of. They have either absolutely no memory of what their adolescence was like, or else they have this distorted memory, which usually follows along the line of all boys are unrestrained sexual wolves and all girls are these innocent sexual lambs who are at the mercy of the sexual wolves, and that colors so much of the discourse that I have with people when I translate a lot of my research to the general public. So it presents some problems when we're trying to think about technology. Another interesting fact, adolescence, the teen years, is when nearly everyone begins partnered sexual activity. And not very often at first, and usually long stretches in between. And we say sexually active in the research world, and people picture sexually activated, like there's a button that got pushed. And it's funny because we think that there's so much sex going on, when in fact there really isn't all that much, at least at first, usually because of the typical constraints of space and privacy, more than anything. And we also think that intercourse is the starting point, which also is not true. A teen's partnered sexual life begins long before intercourse. But sex is one of the many transitions that we make into adulthood. It's a complex process, and it coincides with concerns or challenges about identity, social status, and growing importance of peers, independence from parents, a host of physical, emotional, and cognitive changes that occur that are needed to bring them to full adult status. And in fact, we all were in our early 20s before we even finished some of the key cognitive changes that permit full abstract reasoning. I mean, that is actually quite a late age. We think it's all done by mid-teens, but it's not. It's sometimes into the 20s. And abstract reasoning that is required for assessing risk, probability, long-term consequences. I think that's an important fact to know. Another one for you. Adolescents are interested in sex. Profound, yes. Anxious to try, anxious about trying, and curious about their friends' sexual lives. That is developmentally appropriate. But the most radical idea, I think, that I might present in this small list is that adolescents, both of the male and female variety, despite what you may think, despite what the media projects, are actually far more interested in many ways in romance and relationships. Preoccupied, in fact. There's a lot of great research that shows this fantastic event sampling where you can buzz or monitor students, young people, anybody in the course of their day, and you ask them, what were you thinking at that exact moment? And overwhelmingly, they're thinking about romance, not sex, for boys and girls, men and women, regardless. And people are particularly worried that sex is becoming disconnected from emotional involvement. I can't begin to tell you how many papers I've been asked to review about friends with benefits, booty call, hooking up, etc. And I think that that's not true. Everything I've read, and I have a career based on hacking into people's sexual lives, I can tell you that it is romance, intimacy, and connection in many ways. That's the far stronger force to be reckoned with than is sex, for boys and girls, for men and women. Anyway, more about that later. Another slide. So I'm talking about computer-mediated communication. And back to technology. I promise there'll be more sex coming up. There are some interesting, I think, fascinating features about computer-mediated communication that are particularly important to intimate relationships. It's immediate, it's constant, and in many respects, at least as the user, it's private. It involves communicating virtually in front of a screen, not face-to-face with another person. And as such, there are lowered nonverbal and contextual cues when you're communicating. You can't see the person's reaction. You can't see them startle when you say anything. You can't read any body language. It's amazing. And it gives us this essentially lowered self-consciousness. It's almost like a dome of invisibility when we communicate. And this is important because it emboldens us. We take far more social risks in the questions we ask, in the comments we make, than we would ever take communicating face-to-face. Another slide. And despite having the opportunity to take time to answer, despite having the opportunity to craft a response, texting in particular, messaging, emailing, tweeting, it's very disinhibiting. We respond impulsively, and we reveal far more private detail, and we seek far more private information from others when we communicate using these technologies than we ever do face-to-face. And this is what researchers call the online disinhibition effect. What used to take a process of weeks, months, if not years, to develop sufficient trust or have a sufficient time to really reveal our innermost secrets to somebody important to us, our greatest fears, our important childhood memories, even sexual preferences, we tend to reveal quickly, almost immediately, to someone online. And confidently, it's a product of computer-mediated communication. Now here's the really interesting part. Because self-disclosure is the key ingredient of intimacy, and because we self-disclose far more readily using communication technologies such as texting and email, we experience an accelerated process of intimacy, and felt intimacy increases as a result. So we express affection more directly using these technologies. We feel closer to the person we're communicating with. We like them more. We think they're more attractive than the people with whom we just communicate with face-to-face. And it becomes easier to connect with them, and ultimately, yes, easier to hook up with that person. And that is actually called the hyperpersonalization effect, this feeling that we are closer to somebody than before. And you may have had that experience yourself. You may have been on a flight or in a coffee shop. You've had a quick exchange, fun exchange with somebody, and then pop, you get this Facebook request, and before you know it, you know an extraordinary amount about that person, and they know an extraordinary amount about you. And a question arises: if you reveal your private self to somebody this rapidly, does it mean that you trust that person with your innermost secrets? And in a sense, has our metric of trustworthiness been warped or shifted or changed to the better by technology? Well, maybe. My graduate student, Andrea Boyle, has really been exploring some of these ideas in her doctoral research work, and she's going to be studying the long-term impact of this type of technology on young people's new relationships. And we actually don't know yet all that much about what the longer-term impact may be, but a question for her, for us, is if intimacy develops that rapidly, do they experience breakups that rapidly? Does the entire life course of a relationship get compressed if it's accelerated from the outset? Well, stay tuned for that, because I have to actually get that data going. So in short, we are more likely to reveal personal details through online exchanges in this oversharing world. And youth report that they reveal their real selves online, that there's little they really keep private. And this has been a huge concern for many parents, worrying about how much young people are revealing to strangers who are looking for ways to exploit unsuspecting youth. However, this was actually more a problem closer to a decade ago, when internet use was not so widespread. And so a young person who was communicating online typically had to do so with strangers, because most of their friends or any of their friends may not have been online yet. And so when you interact with strangers, perhaps in chat rooms, yes, there is some risk, usually very low, of developing a relationship with someone who could or might or would do them harm. Can I have another slide? But today, young people communicate that kind of detail so much more often with their friends. They reveal their personal lives, announce new relationships, enact breakups, and provide intimate details online to their friends. 700 perhaps of their closest Facebook friends know the intimate detail of their lives, and also whether they're happening to go to the bathroom that minute, and if they're back now, all the updates of that, or else their lives in 140 characters or less. But what's more interesting to me in many respects, as a social psychologist, is the changing concept of what constitutes private information. And young people often equate wanting to keep something private with being ashamed of that thing. And they view older people really as sexual prudes, erotophobes, uptight, ashamed of their sexual selves. And they often revel in their ability to attract sexual attention. They don't apologize for it. Sex doesn't scare them. It's fun, it's powerful stuff, and they know it. And they talk openly about it amongst themselves, like everything else. And in many ways, I find that very refreshing. But the spate of reality TV shows and the huge popularity of social media network sites such as Facebook and MySpace gives us an idea of how much the tendency to reveal all manner of details about one's life can really go. And it's encouraged, it's celebrated, and there is no shame. So this trend toward increased openness, while some of the most notable changes are really seen in the realm of sex, at least with regard to talking about sex. And you may argue, at least for women, that dressing the part too may be another behavioral factor. But actually we see few changes in actual sexual behavior. In fact, young people today have, see, that phrase just ages me so much. Young people today have first intercourse later in age than their parents did. They also, for age, have fewer sexual partners than their parents' generation did. Teen pregnancies are lower today than they have been in decades, and even when their parents were teens, I might add. And not because they're accessing abortions more often either. They're less likely to wait until they're married to begin sex. But good grief, age of first marriage is now 27. I mean, who can wait that long? It seems like impossible to ask. Maybe I'm giving myself away. Undo. And the only really bad news I can offer you is that STD rates are much higher. But that's a pretty impressive sexual health record, I think, overall. And it's funny how these consistent findings across national studies, representative, and not just Canada, it's also other Western countries anyway, don't make headlines. And why is that? Well, because those headlines don't incite moral panic. But you know what does? Texting does. Sexting incites moral panic, and so does porn. And the two are closely related because they refer to sexually explicit material. Now this is where Dr. Keeley's going to get a little uncomfortable because he's worried I'm going to start talking about the graphics of this. So prime yourself, because here I go. Can I have another? The sexting refers to sending a sexually explicit image or information using communication technologies. And this can be a sexy or suggestive email. It could also be a photo you took of your naked breasts using like a cell phone, or a picture of your outstanding erection, anything endearing that you might want to send to the object of your attraction that they might appreciate. And it really has become a form of new age flirting. Almost half of teens will report that they have engaged in sexting. And in my study, 43% reported sexting naked pictures of themselves online, 44% sexually explicit messages. I think it's likely much higher than that. And it's a form of sexual expression, a pretty safe one in many respects. It's all virtual. And these are just a couple of quotes from a study that was reported recently in the New York Times about sexting. They did some interviews and focus groups with young people. So there's a positive side to sexting. You can't get pregnant from it, and you can't transmit STDs. That's technically true. And it's a kind of safe sex. Also true. What's the next one? Another click. As you get older, kids use raunchy texts more. There are things kids wouldn't want to say in person. One concern, however, arises when photos are shared with people with whom they were not intended, or they go viral. The next slide, please, and the next. So this is what Rachel says. A girl thinks, I know I've been warned against it, but this is something I want to share with my boyfriend, and he's different. Of course he's different. This is what Dan says. If a girl sent me a picture of her boobs, well, obviously, I'd like to show it to some friends, obviously. That's what we would all want to do. But I wouldn't show them a raunchy text from her because that would be awkward. It's more intimate, more private. Dan has standards. Now, the Supreme Court in 2001 ruled, and this is where Canada is different from the US in a nice, refreshing way, that taking an explicit photo of your underage self is not child pornography, technically. Sending it is also okay. But that moment when that photo gets shared with anyone else beyond the two intended constitutes distribution of child pornography and is an offense. That can be a problem. You won't see too many charges pressed at that level unless things go viral, and that's something important. Now, this distribution of a sexually explicit photo or text is less a concern for boys than it is for girls, and it's an issue because of the sexual double standard. I always run into people at conferences that say, surely that's not still active, and you're like, come on, are you crazy? You have to see that research. It's very interesting. So the sexual double standard, boys are encouraged to express their sexual prowess. They're rewarded implicitly and explicitly for their interest in sexual matters and pursuit of sexual opportunities. But not so girls still today. For the same behavior, girls are castigated, degraded, but really for one thing in particular. And that's recreational sex. Sex outside of an affectionate, monogamous context, at least monogamous for her. And in fact, the less a girl, in the teen years in particular, is seen as enjoying sex, the better off she is. Because she can become the object of some serious sexual harassment, vicious bullying, often by her own female peers, but frequently by the boys and men who receive the material. And these stories really make headlines, but they are by far rare compared to the frequency with which sexting takes place. Young people definitely need to know that what starts off as private can quickly become public. They may not be able to believe that the chances of their photo being distributed widely are significant, and you will lack credibility if you try to make that case, especially if you're a parent, concerned, uncle or aunt, anyone like that who's forever pushing the panic button. You just won't have credibility. But instead, if you need to argue something, you can argue that their phone could be stolen and some creep is going to get off looking at their naked photos, so that someone may hijack their account or try to slander them by sharing the photo or message at school or at work. But as a parent, I would actually worry less about my child's photo being seen by unintended others, as they will eventually, one hopes, get over that. I would worry far more about being a parent of a child who maliciously distributed information or a photo with the intent of hurting someone. If my child engaged in that kind of vicious cyberbullying of another person, I would know that something had gone seriously and morally wrong. Cyberbullying overlaps considerably with traditional bully-victim data. The kids who are mean and malicious face-to-face tend to be the same ones who are mean and malicious via technology. And cyberbullying, although it tends to be less repetitive, it's usually a one-off occasion, the harm done is often psychological rather than physical, but the impact appears to be much more extreme and much more long-lasting. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. Another slide, please. Pornography. Many people are seriously concerned about the increased accessibility of pornography. Most youth have seen sexual images. Some come across them accidentally, but not so often. Most seek it, their friends show it to them, or they learn about it from other sources. And seekers are usually 14, they're usually male, or at least boys and men are more likely to report seeking pornography. And just to reinforce this point, it is developmentally appropriate to be curious about sex, to want to know how sex works, and to enjoy being sexually aroused. Now, before the internet, most people would watch videos or raid their father's collection of Playboys or Hustlers. And yet, porn now is so much more accessible than that. In fact, to the point where it's becoming considered a super peer, in the sense that it is now a significant source of information and sexual socialization for young people. Young people know well how to access it. There are so many free sites on the web, and you can't help but trip over them practically daily. And they play it in the background at parties. They download it onto phones, iPods. They share it in MP4 format. Some even direct their own amateur versions of it. And not always amateur. Some can actually make some serious dollars by participating in virtual sex communities, being a virtual sex exchange. You can make quite a lot of money doing that. Someone wants to pay for virtual sex and you're willing, you can do that. Can I have the next clip, please? There's just not much research yet on youth and internet porn. We know for sure that perceptions of peer norms are linked to actual behaviors. The more you think your same-sex peers are engaging in a particular sexual activity, the more likely you are to engage in it yourself, and regardless of how accurate you are. Teens who watch higher levels of porn tend to overestimate how much of their peers are engaging in the activities that generally are lower in frequency. That is what porn depicts. So things that porn depicts, teens often think are much more common than they are. Anal sex is a great example, facials, threesomes, moresomes, and the like. And one study in the Netherlands, really this research group, Valkenburg and Peter, found that the more frequent exposure to porn was also associated with not just the higher perceived social realism, that is, they thought that the porn depicted was characterizing common or typical sexual activities, but that high porn diets were also equated with higher instrumental sexual attitudes amongst teens. That is, those who watched a lot of porn tended to report much more casual or physical motives for sex, like to get off, than affectionate or relational motives, such as to connect with somebody. We need also certainly to be concerned about the depiction of women in porn and the lessons about gender that porn reinforces. Women are typically objectified. They're depicted as passive yet grateful targets of male sexual attention, often aggressive, otherwise emotionally void attention, and that's never a healthy lesson to learn. However, porn gets boring. We habituate to it, and most young people decrease their use of it considerably with age. And I don't know if this is good news or bad news for you, but they become far more interested in pursuing their own sexual experiences than watching other people having sex, though almost no man ever gives it up entirely. But some people don't habituate to it. They require an ever more intense, ever more explicit level of stimulation. But they tend to be people who have bigger sexual and relationship problems than just their interest in porn. It also does not appear to have much impact on their actual behavior, except perhaps a temporary increase in participation in the sexual activities they were engaging in anyway. So it serves the purpose of increasing sexual arousal, as it's designed to do, but not necessarily increasing experimentation. Yet I'm curious to see whether that will last in the long term. If we really think that porn is somehow altering perceptions of what constitutes normal sexual activity, I expect that there will soon emerge changes in actual behavior. Okay. One quote: "We didn't learn that much in school about sex education, so one has to look at porn, but the good thing is that you might learn a new way of having sex," kind of. Okay, next, please. Texting. Texting is a curious mode. Are there particular forms of technology use about which we should be concerned? Possibly. And it might be texting. Frank created a media stir by reporting that US adolescents who engage in high rates of texting were at far greater risk of binge drinking, illegal drug use, and physical aggression. They also reported higher rates of sexual partners and earlier sexual experience. Now, why would that be? I analyzed my own data from the study of New Brunswick High School students that I've been doing to determine whether the sexual and risk outcomes were associated with high rates of texting, computer, video, or TV use. And unlike Frank, my analyses did not show that there was a link to health risk behaviors. They weren't more likely to be drinking, using marijuana, prescription drugs, anything like that. However, there was about a 4.5 times increased odds of sexual experience over a course of 1 year for high users as compared to moderate or low users. No other differences were found, actually, in their sexual experiences. Now, it's unclear why heavy texting might be linked more closely to sexual behavior. A lot of parents seem to think, well, they may be sitting in front of a screen, but at least they're not out running around having sex. Well, texting meets needs to stay connected for sure, and especially young people who have a great need to feel like they are in the loop, that they are connected, and that they're in the know. And heavy texting likely reflects greater problems with social anxiety and loneliness. A stronger need, essentially, to feel connected. And both texting and sex may be ways to alleviate those feelings, self-medicating in a way. And obviously, this needs more exploration. Just want to show you this one. This is just some physiological data that I came across that depicts receiving and sending a text, respiration rate, blood pulse volume, which is the index of heart rate, skin conductance, and also EMG, muscle tension. And if you note, you can see the point at which a person receives a text. It has this emotional, affective reaction, or at least an arousal response. It's kind of interesting. And these researchers weren't that interested in linking it to sex, but I think there's something that might emerge from there. Okay, the next slide, please. Predators and stalkers. I need to hurry. There's been considerable, and actually one more, please. A lot of publicity about online predators. Predators prey on naive children using trickery and violence. The depiction is actually largely inaccurate. Most internet sex crimes involve adults hooking up with teens, which is usually consensual if illegal. And like the child abduction stories that you always hear in the news, predator cases are actually relatively rare. They make very good copy. And we're terrified by the specter of the evil stranger out to harm or corrupt our children. Teens are actually very risk aware online, more savvy than older people, but yes, much more likely, for instance, to lose track of their photo online, and more likely in some ways to learn the hard way what new technologies entail. But we could all stand to be far more risk aware. Stalkers and trackers is a topic actually you're not going to find in the research at all. A stalker is someone who pursues a person repeatedly to the point of inducing fear. A tracker is actually my term, so here we go, first to use it. A tracker is a concept I'm thinking of really mostly from anecdotal reports here and there and things I'm gleaning from the remote part of a research paper on occasion. But because new technologies make it practically impossible not to be accountable for your whereabouts. Where are you? What are you doing? Who are you with? How come you said you were at home? How come you didn't answer that message? It gives people, not parents necessarily, but parents too, but it gives dating partners the opportunity to really track a person. And someone who is particularly possessive or jealous seems to be more of a nuisance in this way. in so many ways, you can no longer go missing in action. You are always accountable. Where are you? Why aren't you there yet? Take a picture. I want to see who's there. And I have some concerns about this. You know, does your child track another person? Is he or she being tracked? Is someone creeping their Facebook page incessantly? Are they getting jealous or angry if they're not responding immediately? These are just some concerns I wanted to put out there as possible links to young people's intimate lives, and something I'm beginning to worry about a little bit. I really am getting close. So, a few other concerns, really not so much sex-related as they are technology-related. Mostly just to say that sex is not so much an issue in light of some other things. The probability of overweight, particularly in this era of growing obesity, is much higher amongst people who are high technology users. There's also a growing problem of compulsive behavior or problems with impulse control with internet technologies. Gambling's one example, but pornography use is definitely another. And there seems to be a notable generational difference in personality characteristics mapped by some people, notably an increase in narcissism, which things like Facebook and tweeting definitely reinforce, as well as, despite our interest in what everyone else is up to, decreased empathy in younger people today. And research is really showing that it is the repetitive, the intensive, and the rapid stimulation that internet technologies provide, perhaps the most important, that there may actually be structural changes to our brains in the way that we think, and most notably, our ability to focus, to concentrate, and contemplate, rather important abilities. It grabs our attention. It's so interesting, the internet, only to scatter our attention. And there's really some concern that those effects might be long-lived. Next slide. Just to wrap things up here, some conclusions. We will never return to a pre-technology era. All information, words, images, numbers, sounds, can be translated into digital code. Our mind is consumed by this medium. It's inundated our lives. We're obsessed. We're in love. We'll never give it up. And in so many ways, the best advice people can give you is to embrace it. A second conclusion is that we will never, ever, ever prevent teenagers from having sex. That's actually their job, is to become adults. And this is one of the transitions that young people need to make. This was never going to be the talk about recommending the best security system for your home computer to lock it down so your child can't access porn. It was never going to be that talk. Sex is really part of being human. It's obviously how our species survived. It's designed to be fun, it's interesting, and a lot of people tend to enjoy it. And teenagers know that. And we want them to be healthy, sexually functioning people. That's their job, to learn those behaviors, and they do so as they become an adult. But really the idea that matters, I think, particularly if you're a concerned adult in a life with the life of a teen in front of you, the best you can do is to stay informed, stay aware, keep talking, and if you haven't been talking, start now, because the earlier you start, the better. You avoid lecturing and judging, and then get out of the way. Thank you.